Well, it's so nice to have this wonderful little group here today. Oh, Rhonda is coming as well. This is amazing. Um, so I'll pull up a slide deck in just a second for a few minutes. Let me tell you briefly where we're going today. So we have an hour. It's our last of 3 hours together. My vision for this hour is that we'll spend about 10 minutes talking about the framing of what we're going to do. I'm going to remind you of a few quick ideas. I'm going to play for half an hour in our theory of action sandbox. And then we're going to spend about 15 minutes checking in with one another about like next steps, any kind of things you'd like to express for future learning and things like that. That's my plan. Hours go by so fast. I'm just going to get started. I hope that's non-controversial. And let me share my screen and get right into it. Share my screen. There we go. Okay. So I hope that you can all see my there we go, my slideshow. Now from the beginning, can you see a white slide that says KBE Assessment Working Group Meeting 3?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you, fantastic. Okay, so today's our third meeting. As a quick reminder, one more time, the goals of this working group were threefold. First one, to talk a little bit about foundational design principles for a future-oriented state assessment system. So we're going to talk about those today along the way as we're talking about the theory of action, which is our secondary goal. And then as a personal member goal, you all wanted to learn a little bit more about what's going on in the School Council, the AISC, and generally in the field. So hopefully I continue to have provided you with some valuable resources. And of course, it's not like today is the third day we're going to meet and then it's all going to stop, right? That's kind of silly. It's just a step along the way. All right, as a reminder, last week, some of you had some time to provide me with some thinking around their theory of action components and the design principles. And today, we're going to finish that, and then we're going to talk about some next steps for the KBE, the School Council, and organizations like ours. And I'm glad that, Lou, you're here. So I know you shared with Meredith some of your thinking this morning in an email to me, because I'd asked for that, and that was really helpful. So maybe at that point later, if you're still in the call, then you can say a few words as well. For everybody, it might be good to level set. All right, so let's talk about the theory of action and design principles, and then we go and talk about next steps. As far as the theory of action is concerned, I use here the language theory of action and theory of change. That's not necessarily the same thing, and it depends a little bit also on the framing and the perspective that you're bringing to this work. Brian and I were just part of a multi-day internal learning series that was about equity considerations for innovations in accountability systems. And I found that personally very powerful, excuse me, because the way people in different countries or provinces or states talked about the way they engage with community members and with local districts was very similar in some cases to what is going on in Kentucky. And it really foregrounded that the underlying values and beliefs for what a most powerful theory of change is highly important, obviously, to think through the often more almost technocratic representations of what theories of actions are. So they're not the same thing, but they're highly related. And today we're going to play with both of them just a little bit, but we're going to frame it in terms of the term theory of action. And a few reminders quickly. So theories of action can exist at multiple grain sizes conceptually. Therefore, they can exist for entire systems or for system components. So you may see that for an assessment system. You may see it for a specific assessment program. You may see it for an individual assessment. You may see it for other parts of an initiative. They can have a more theoretical, a more outcome or more action-oriented focus. And there are different representations. So for some of you, you may have seen in your work life some verbal descriptions. You may have seen some of those tables that are like if-then statements. Today, we're going to look at a graphical form. And last time, and in between the last session and this session, Some of you were able to play a little bit with that tabular representation. And so, the idea is that there's not a singular right or wrong representation. Like with any representation, any language that's being used, they foreground certain things and they background other things. And you trade something in. And also the way people are wired, or the way in a particular moment thinking comes more natural to them, some of these representations work better for them in a given moment, or maybe overall, than others. So if you feel some resistance to some of the graphical representation, I would say embrace it, lean into it, and we can play with, in general, with alternative representation. And you should play with alternative representations that allow you to capture your principled thinking in a way that is authentic and meaningful to you. But since I can't do 10 different things in parallel, we're going to do a few things. We're going to try with a few different representations. We have the table today is the graphic, and hopefully there's something in that for all of you. As a general structure, you've heard me say this before, I really like this metaphor of saying with a theory of action, you take a snapshot, you take a picture of something. And because of the way cameras work and mentally we think about problems, we can zoom in and we can zoom out, we can move the frame around and the camera around. And so it's not like there is, again, the one way in which you can do this right or wrong. It's more a deliberate choice about saying, like, what do we want to capture with this theory of action, and using it then as a tool to level set, to make strategic decisions, and to learn how to speak the same language often, actually, especially in interdisciplinary teams or when people come from different backgrounds. So I want us today to agree on a few things as we are starting to play with this and go into our little sandbox. And so you tell me whether there's anything that you disagree with here. So I put these statements here because they seem very reasonable to me. We've used some of them in other contexts. But if there's anything that you think is worth mentioning or that you disagree with, please let me know. So the first thing, you see it's 3 blocks of 3. So the first 3 are about focus. So I want us to focus today on a theory of assessment for the state assessment and accountability system. Why do I say this? I say this actually because of the first bullet point in the second block, which is we probably all can acknowledge that most of the curricular relevant assessment work is done not at the state level, but at the local level. But we're here to think about the state perspective today, predominantly. That doesn't mean exclusively, and it's connected, but I want us to pick that as a focus just for today. And because of that, I want us to focus on a higher level of grain size. And I don't want us to focus just on any singular individual state-created or state-mandated assessment. It may be obvious, but that could exist. I'm also saying that here because that's something we could do, we could choose to do. We want to focus on what I might say is an internal-oriented and maybe a little bit more complex theory of action rather than a public-facing simplification or abstraction of that. So this came up in an email exchange that I had with Meredith and Lou this morning when we're talking about, like this graphic that I'm going to show you. Yeah, that is a little bit complex. And if we want to use it as a communicative tool, something like that, then we probably have to make it simpler. And that's right. But today I want us to sort of embrace that a little bit and say, okay, let's just work with that tableau, so to speak, as is. I already talked about the acknowledgement that most of the curricular relevant assessment work and also accountability work, school improvement work, is done at the local level, local being district or school. And we do want to therefore acknowledge and also call out those factors that affect the design, use, and evaluation of the state assessment and accountability system. So we don't want to foreground them too much, but we do want to make sure that we think about them today and put them on the table. And I do want us to acknowledge and embrace the complexities and interdependencies and the required system or the system thinking. Sometimes people often we all want things simple, right? Can't we just make it straight up and straightforward? And there's pieces of this where I think we can just agree on certain values and outcomes, and it is going to be pretty straightforward. And some things may seem a little bit like almost like an intellectual abstraction. But I also think it is healthy sometimes to be almost a little bit humble and a little bit, maybe overwhelmed isn't quite the word, but respectful of the fact that there are a lot of things that need to be thought about when it comes to the design, implementation, and evaluation of assessment and accountability system. And I think every professional kind of knows that, but sometimes when it comes to decision making, it's very hard, I think, to get to a point for all of us where we can convince ourselves that we can make an informed decision about something. And that means different things to different people. So I want you to think about, if I am being put in a position where I'm being asked to make a decision, what do I need in order to feel like I can make that in an informed way? And it's honoring the complexities of the system. So I want us to agree on that, hopefully. And then finally, 3 points I wanted to say is that let's agree that we're going to explain what we mean by specific terms to others with examples. I always think that's really helpful. And I wanted to call that out today because, language is so fallible, and it's often, it's easy to nod our heads and do a little bit of sort of that group agreement. And I want to hear from you, how you're thinking about problems without any judgment. And so I want us to appreciate and explore the differences in beliefs, perspectives, and orientations that we may bring to the table. And the way I wanted to say this today in the last point was that I want us to strive for consensus, but without forcing it. And so if there are points where we disagree with one another and have different beliefs, that's great. And it's actually very productive. So let's capture that and find some ways of characterizing that disagreement, where it's coming from, and what it may mean for the work that the board, the department, the communities, the school council, everybody is doing. All right, so let me stop there and check in with you. Is there something where you go, this is this crazy talk, there's a point here that I don't really agree with, or is there something that you find is also really valuable just for the process? And then we're going to get almost right into this. You still alive? Everybody still there? Hello?
I think this list looks great.
Okay. I appreciate that. That's helpful to you. Perfect.
I'm on board too, Andre.
Okay. All right. So let's see whether we can live this out, right? So this is, by the way, another example of something where somebody puts down values. We say, like, oh, these are meaningful values or orientations. And you see immediately how you're like, that sounds good, but let's see how this actually plays out when we're doing something, right? And I think that is often the challenge in this. A lot of things are easy to agree on in the abstract, but they get a little bit more nuanced and complicated when you say to people, well, tell me a scenario where you think this comes into play, or what this actually means. Tell me a problem that you want to solve differently that you have been solving before, where you've been running into barriers, right? So let's think about those. Let's play this out a little bit in our minds. And to do that, you don't have to read this. There's nothing, I can't read this either in this representation. I'm going to pull this up in just a second. I'm going to call that my cards on the table representation, how everybody's going to put your cards on the table. Yeah. So this is different sort of like regions, like a game board where you have different aspects of the game that you're playing. And what it is on the top, the green stuff, that is facilitating things. On the left, the top green, that's facilitating resources. On the right, it's not so much facilitating directly, but it's sort of almost like mission-wise facilitating. These are positive effects of stakeholders that we want to expect, that we hope to see for our system. The red stuff on the bottom is the opposite. So on the left-hand side, it's constraints or barriers that we might be able to anticipate. And then on the bottom right, it's negative effects that stakeholders might experience and that we want to mitigate in some way. The blue stuff in the middle, that's essentially the core, if you come at this from like a Western perspective, saying like, there's some actions we want to take. And in this graphic, you'll see me differentiating between state and district level actions. And then there's some outcomes that we might hope these actions produce in the short term and in the long term. So that leaves us with the yellow stuff. The yellow stuff is two different things. On the right-hand side, that box, I use that to capture some of the methods and the quality considerations for those methods that you might want to use in order to say, how good are we at achieving these outcomes? And, how might I find this out? Might I give a survey? Might I do empirical data analyses? May I do individual stakeholder interviews or town halls, whatever, right? So how are we going to find that out? And on the left-hand side, first I was going to do a different color, but then there were so many colors floating around. I was going to give that a yellow because it's also sort of like a contextual factor. This is the foundational values and beliefs. And I know those terms have connotations that are in certain contexts undesirable, but I hope we can today just like give ourselves the freedom to say, we hope that we know what that means, these underlying non-negotiables that we all, these statements that we write in order to describe situations where we get uncomfortable if these conditions aren't met or if the actions that we take aren't oriented toward those. Right, so that's the game board. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually zoom into this, and we're going to do this a little bit section by section. I think you'll also probably notice that you might be already drawn to a particular kind of aspect. You might be like, ooh, like it's fun to think about resources and constraints. Other people might be like, oh, it might be kind of fun to think about actions and outcomes. Some people really are often drawn to values and underlying non-negotiables. So that's just a recognition that when you set this up in processes, different people have different entry points. But at the end, we're all trying to do some kind of systems thinking. And again, is this perfect? No, it's not. This representation trades some things in relative to others. So the table, for example, the advantage of a table representation is that you can take a singular idea, and Lisa, you did a great job at that in particular, where you take a singular idea and then you walk it through the row and you sort of keep the focus on that idea and you keep the boundary relatively simple. This is a little bit more of a grab bag, the way I've set this up, where different ideas that are related are sort of represented here. But if you really wanted to walk that all the way through, we could draw even individual arrows between individual white boxes inside and say, this particular action has an impact on this particular outcome and so on and so forth. And at some point that gets graphically just too overwhelming, and it's easier to do that for maybe a smaller aspect of the space. So today we're going to treat that a little bit simpler. We're just going to put ideas on the table, assuming that this simple thing, actions lead. We hope that actions lead to outcomes. We are constrained. We have constraints and we have resources. We want to see some positive effects and want to mitigate negative effects. We have to find some ways in which we can evaluate how we're doing. And all of this is driven by foundational assumptions, or let's call them non-negotiables. That's the term for it. Does anybody have any questions about the architecture of this? Any comments before I zoom in? Lou, I see you came off mute or on camera. Did you want to ask anything or say anything?
No, I was just able to, Meredith put a link to the document, so now I'm just able to look at it a little bit more closely. Thank you.
Okay. Well, while you're thinking, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this up in a document in a program called Lucidchart. That's the program in which I've created this. I've come to really like this one because it allows you to move things around, and you can see there's all kind of shapes and colors and all of that. So for dynamic representations, it works well, but it's, for people like you, the one thing where you come together in a working group, the hard thing is for you to do that also, you'd have to create quickly a free account, and then you have to go in there. And so today I thought what I'm going to do, given our time limit, I'm just going to zoom in here. We talk about things and I'll take some notes. And I'm going to take some notes perhaps here in the brainstorming bucket next to it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom in so that you can actually read this. This is very helpful. And we're going to start off, I'm proposing we're going to start off in the middle. We'll see how this goes, but let's start with the blue boxes. So what I like you to do is I like you to think about in frame that I think is very meaningful at the moment, which is the whole portrait of a graduate, right? Portrait of a graduate writ large. And I want you to also think about not the current state as is, right? I mean, there's some realism, but really also think about the future state that you'd like to see. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you about, let me give you about 2 minutes or so, with 2 to 3 minutes to read through what is already here. These are statements that some of you have written explicitly in, let's say, the spreadsheet, or Lou, I took some of the statements in the email that you had sent to me. You might see them somewhere. There are also things that are written in other documents, like, the AISC report or the United We Learn report. And some of them are also just simply, kind of common statements for this kind of work. You see there's a little bit of a slight language difference. Some people use the term portrait of a graduate, and some people use the term learner profile, and that's totally fine. For today, I think we're going to treat them for now, I would say, as interchangeably, even though they do connotate different things. All right, let me give you a minute to, let me zoom in this a little bit more. One out. And Meredith said that she sent to you the latest version of this, which has, if it's the version, Meredith, I sent yesterday, there's one slight difference between that, but it's mostly on the right-hand side, not here. So I'll be quiet for the next 2 minutes. Does anybody need more time? Let me check in with you. If so, please say yes. Okay. So let's say there's 3 options for you to react to this. And in the interest of time, I'm going to constrain this a little bit. The 3 options are, is there something you'd like to amend? Is there something you'd like to add to this? Or is there something that you think doesn't really belong there or needs to be moved to a different box? Amendment, addition, or deletion, moving. And think about this as just like essentially your place to call certain things out, right? Actions, outcomes.
I don't know if I'm on the right track on this one, but I'll ask, and that might model the process. So if I'm looking at the box on the portrait of a learner under the school districts column, there's the next to the last box says school districts develop walkthrough forms for administrators to check to see if learner profile goals are being implemented into daily instruction. I might suggest that might actually evoke some former practice that might get in the way, some negative transfer. So I'm wondering if that might be something like school districts develop tools for teachers and administrators to ensure the learner profile goals are being implemented in daily instruction. And I think those tools could be myriad and more modern, things like the professional learning communities function as a way to ensure that the profile is being implemented. Walkthroughs may be an option. The teachers' professional growth goal setting could be an option. Formative performance assessment could be an option. So I'm just thinking about maybe a broader understanding. I'm afraid if we put a box out that people will just latch on to, I've got to set up walkthroughs. And that may or may not be the preferred.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think there's already a few rich things in there, right? So this idea that really simple terms call up practices and like naming to past, to undesirable aspect. But let me also check in, I'm editing this, and I think one of the things I want to be respectful of. So I think, Lisa, you wrote this, right? Because can see learner profiles in there. Do you want to talk about what you were thinking about when you were writing this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just thinking of a teacher standpoint, if you're expecting teachers to, do the steps to get them to follow the learner profile, what are ways that, administrators can assess them that they are doing that,
So then the edit that Lou suggested is not controversial to you, like you'd be.
No, not at all. Okay. Not at all. No, okay. That was a great idea.
It could be, so it's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else then? Thank you. Thanks for checking. Anything else? Anybody else want to react to something where they go like, again, amend it?
Andre, this is just a curiosity question. Yeah. I know on the right blue box, the short-term outcomes, the very first one, all school districts have a learner profile in place. Do we know in Kentucky, like how, are there a lot of school districts that haven't even thought about this, or are they all near completion of this profile?
So that's a great question. So what I know about this is that Sarah Snipes has been doing or is currently doing a really comprehensive implementation survey about this. And she and I have been working a little bit on some parts of that. And it's really going out to all the school districts and is asking them essentially where in different aspects of this work they currently are. So Meredith, I don't know whether you've heard from her where she is in terms of like completion rate. I know she told me recently that she has gotten quite a few responses, but quite a few I don't know what the number is out of all the school districts. Do you know anything about that?
I don't have the most recent count, but I do know that she was pleasantly surprised and happy with the results. So it does appear that a lot of districts have entertained it. But yes, I was going to say Cheer Young's team's helping Sarah, so she'll have the better numbers.
We were at 93 a couple of weeks ago that have some form of portrait and still growing. That number was still growing.
Okay.
Is there like a deadline for these school districts? I mean, if it's going to be a short-term outcome, is it something like you have to have this by 2024 or?
The board is entertaining graduation requirements related to a portrait for 4 years from now. So I think there is a long runway.
Gotcha. Okay.
I want to also name this. What I love about this conversation is, so Lisa, your question to me is about, so what does it signal if we put this language in this box, right? Like, is this something that we just internally think is something, first of all, we're putting it there, I think you would say, like, if we put it there, I think we should all agree that this is something that we actually desire, right? If not, then, maybe the language shouldn't be all school districts, or it could be most school districts. There's also the language in here, a learner profile there's no, it doesn't say anything about the alignment of that profile to the state profile, the way that's currently written, right? It doesn't say anything about the time frame. I mean, the short-term outcomes were, when I gave that task, I sort of said, that's like, what was it, less than, let's see, I know, it was a less I played with, less than 3 or less than 5, I don't remember. But, a few years, whereas the long-term outcomes is more like 5 to 10 years or even longer. But so, yeah, those are things to think about, I think, communally. And that's not something, for all of these boxes we're going to resolve in an hour, but I just want to call that out because language does matter and the process in which it's embedded matters. So that's good. And, what I'm going to do? I'm going to shift gears because I want us to at least go through all the box areas a little bit. So you have a feel for why they're there, and then you're going to get some time after this meeting to just take another look at it and think about this one more time, So let's look at this box here. And in fact, these are not quite the same, even though they're the green colors. On the left is, what are the left is about resources. And you see, I separated here 2 different kinds because this came up in the way some of you had written statements. So let's talk about resources that are already there that you can draw on. And resources doesn't just have to be cash and money. It could also be people and investment. And these resources, that you would need in order to accomplish some of the goals that are listed in the bottom below. So why don't I give you a quick minute here to read or scan these. Oh, and sorry, and I should say on the right-hand side, my apologies. On the right-hand side, this is also something positive. It's the positive effects for stakeholders, which are, by the way, often very similar to the goals. It's just essentially a place where, for people who really are thinking about, students or teachers or families or caregivers, and they want to say something that's really important to them, this is often a place where they can call that out. So I'll let you scan through both the resources and the positive effects, and then we're going to do the same quick check-in about what you think of these. Does anybody need more time? Okay, then let's play the same game. There's not that many boxes in this at the moment, so this is easier, hopefully. Amend. What was it? Add or delete or move.
And Andre, I don't know if this was already caught on your new version, but on the right-hand side, students and families, you got 2 that are the same.
Maybe yeah, I did. Already. I did copy paste it. So yeah, thank you. Gone. Do you have anything that you'd like to replace it with? Is there something else for students and families?
I can't think of anything right now.
Well, in many ways, these 3 are all about students, right? So we could, I mean, I feel like, does somebody want to add something for families and caregivers? So for example, it could be about emotional investment, could be about getting tools that support the students' learning, can be changing the engagement with the school.
I mean, it's a lot.
Oh, go yeah, Lee.
No, Lee.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of things to put in each one of these boxes. When we have children that are educated in this way, they should come out and be more collaborative, used to working in teams, have more career-ready skills and knowledge. And that's where I had trouble with this whole thing, was trying to figure out how you put everything in here that we know we're trying to do. And I guess I'll save my other comment for later about where do we stand on the things we already know. But those are some outcomes that I think I know business keeps asking for its kids to be more collaborative, to work in teams, to be willing to use their deeper learning to be better problem solvers.
Right. And I think, Lee, that's a great point. And so this gets to the issue of granularity, right? So you see me editing this middle box. So I think to me at a higher level, that was sort of embedded in that box, but it wasn't calling out the individual skill sets, which could be done, right? Like they could be, here says they will truly embody the portrait of a graduate, and I added the language associated competencies, and then, being a stronger collaborator, for example, would be one of them. So, like if that is something that matters to, such as being forgot what the, see, I should have memorized this. Does anybody remember offhand what the language was around collaborator in the Kentucky profile?
Productive.
Yeah, okay. Right. So now such as gives an example of that, and the citizen call out that was valuable to the person who wrote this in the first place, right? So, yeah.
And I'm wondering about a box for, this is very much in keeping with what Lee just said.
Yeah.
Maybe we note that students experience a better transition or a smoother transition to life after high school. So post-secondary opportunities. You refer to it in the aligned system, and I think that's probably what you mean in the top box. But specifically from P12 into higher ed, the military, world of work. That's the nexus that employers, I think, are asking us for.
Yeah. So I'm going to put some language in here, and then, part of this entire process would be to reconcile that. Fun fact, I didn't write the top statement. That was one of you. So military, workforce, college, etc. Yeah. But yeah, so that's great. So now, there it is. All right, so let's, in the interest of time, this is something, as you can tell, like if we had more time together, what I might also do is I might put you into working groups. You can play with this more. But today we're just going to keep it short and sweet as an initial step to just get into that mindset. All right, so let's talk about the red boxes quickly. Constraints on the left-hand side. So here I didn't differentiate between, constraints that already exist and constraints that might be. That's too depressing. I did constraints at the state and at the district level. I thought that was a little bit more productive given what you'd written. And then the negative effects on the right-hand side. This is something that, some people don't like calling out as much, but I think it's really important to have those, at least on the board, and then think about strategies to mitigate them. All right, so I'll let you read through this quickly, and then we'll do the same approach as before. Sorry, I was zooming in a little bit. Made it a little bit confused. There we go. All right. Anybody need more time? Okay, so then let's play the game. Amend, add, or delete move. Anything that comes to mind. Is there something that isn't called out that you think it's really worth mentioning?
Andrea, I would say on the left red box under district level, when it says about how many schools do not communicate between, especially during the transition of schools, I would like to add even just the transition between grade levels.
Okay.
Within a school.
Okay. Right. Anybody else? You know, you think it would be easy for you to call up a particular state level constraint that you're feeling. Are there any ones that you feel are worth mentioning from an internal document?
When we had our last discussion, there was a state, and I forget which one, where the legislature had really put down a very affirmative statement about competency-based education versus seat time. And I don't know whether we have such a statement that we could use to show that the legislature was buying into the concept of what we're doing.
Ah, right. You know what I would put this? I would put this under primary state action.
Okay.
You know, because what you were saying to me, if I heard you right, was that you were saying the creation of essentially it's a commitment, let's call it that, to competency-based education from the board, or
I think from legislators.
And legislators, okay. To support the implementation and sustainability of efforts or something like that, you know?
Yeah. The biggest reform that happened in Kentucky was due to the Supreme Court saying that we were failing to fund education. And we don't know if we have a driver for this one or not, but they at least need to make a statement that they understand what we're trying to do and are committed to, you know, more competency based. So I think you're right. That's the right box for it to go in.
Mm-hmm. And the good news, I think, Lou, is that this entire effort that you're part of right now and throughout the summer is really about like bundling and synthesizing also these kinds of statements from the board perspective, right? So that's also part of the work to sort of say these are really things we believe in and that we want to support. Okay, anybody? You know what? It's 3:44. No more on that. Let's go to this box. This is a really interesting one, and want to spend a few minutes on this. I know I'm a little bit already over, but I want to spend maybe 5 to 7 minutes on this, and if I can, on the other yellow one, if the other one is maybe not quite as important today. So this is the non-negotiables, and I separated them here by the education system more broadly and the assessment and accountability system more specifically. And I did that because I think we all recognize that the assessment and accountability system should be in support of achieving the goals of the education system more broadly. But there are also aspects of the assessment and accountability system that can be specifically named that are worthwhile calling here. All right. Give you a minute to look through that. Anybody need more time? Okay, so I hope that when you read through these, you notice that some of these are more technical, some of them are more humanistic, some of them, they have different flavors, right? So I hope that there's some way you go like, oh, I'm not so sure about this. So let's see whether this is true, or whether you want to ask for clarification or maybe amend something. So again, amendment, deletion, or moving it, or adding something. So something that comes to mind that you want to call out that's not listed here.
Just a thought. I love all of these. I wonder though if we shouldn't concentrate more on the right-hand column, the assessment and accountability ones, for parsimony, for the sake of parsimony and clarity as we move forward. But I also want to add that this box is incredibly important to moving the work forward. This shared set of values and beliefs will garner a great deal of momentum and forward motion for us, I believe. I think these are really important statements.
Yeah, and to build on that, one of the things that I'm going to do after the meeting today is I'm going to first of all give you a chance to, fiddle with this just a little bit via comments in a simple way, and then I'm going to put these together in a little survey, Sarah has done as well, and then you can sort of both give your degree of alignment, let's call it that, in your additional comments.
I think some prioritization would be powerful too.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great point, right? So that's why I called this the cards on the table approach, where it's sort of like right now they're more or less, well, they're a little bit structured, but not fully hierarchically organized. And there's a variety of things you could do, right? So for example, give you an example of something like on the left-hand side, the education system redesign can only be successful if all voices are heard, respected, and integrated in the process. Now, if you want to simplify this, you take education system redesign out and call it the A&A system redesign. And, and it's still, that's equally a powerful statement, right? So, yeah. and then others are focused or lean a little bit more into the education system at large, but, can be maybe taken out if the purpose then is to narrow this down onto the A&A system. So one of the things that I can do, I was thinking about doing anyway, Lou, is to make a version of this where I'm going to do a little bit after you've all given your comments of more ideas, then also winnow it down for the A&A system also in particular, to make it sort of focus it a little bit more on that component to the degree that that's possible.
And then just two other quick thoughts. Second one on the right about centering marginalized students. I think that's really important. I think we might need a little bit more language there, because I know what you mean. I think I know what you mean, but I should clarify. I believe that is that we must ensure that the system helps us meet the needs of marginalized and vulnerable students, not exacerbate their learning experiences. So I don't have all the right words for that one, but that might be
I love it.
Language and again, so important. I'll prioritize that one for sure. And then one I don't see, and again, don't have the words, I'll need to think about it a little bit, but I'm wondering if we should, in one of those two sets, caution leaders to all of us to be very sensitive to the potential for unintended consequences of the system design. We've seen so many systems run amok because we couldn't even imagine all the ways it could have gone wrong in implementation. So I think a caution to ourselves. So maybe as we build the system, we build in the expectation that the system, we will address unintended consequences as they occur, without throwing it out the window.
Yeah. And my careful consideration, continuous evaluation, and ongoing addressing, as that's not quite right, but of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And the box looks a little bit weird now, but we get the idea, right?
Yeah.
It's somewhere. Okay. Yeah, I'll do that later. Okay, yeah, perfect. That's right. And I think that also, aligns very there's almost like, some meta comments, right? Because this is true for the ANA system, it's true for the vibrant learning experiences. It's true for the accountability, right? So it's almost like there's almost this hierarchy in everything where you sort of say there's these overarching mindsets and practices, which is also the entire process of inclusive co-design, but then around that, maybe some specifics, and saying like, we need to make sure that we really engage in this work in this way, no matter almost what component of the work we're doing. And then I think that there's some aspects that are a little bit more specific. So I think, for example, the incentivization of what ANA systems can do is very specific to the fact that they are ANA systems, right? That they have a particular function and historically and so on and so forth. But, I would say what I found very powerful, I will share this quickly. Like, when we had our retreat, I found it so powerful that there was a gentleman from British Columbia, and he was talking about, his work with Indigenous community and how they'd done educational reform, blah, blah, blah. And he said, like, look, at the end of the day, for him and for their province, for the province, it came down to also like re-articulating statements about trust and reorienting people to say, like, he told me things like, he's like, we don't even differentiate between, in their case, the language between teachers and learners anymore. We call everybody a learner. We foreground the fact that we trust the teachers and that we know that they are strong professionals, and everything is then built on that sort of flipped belief system. I found that very powerful because it's, so I think because with a lot of this stuff, we always try to do that as well. But so I think this is good to have these North Star principles that people can agree with or disagree with. All right, so let me just.
I don't know if that was Ron Allen or not, but yeah, he's
it was. Yes,
to that work in BC. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, some of them are really just lovely, Andre. The corruptibility one, I think, goes with unintended consequences. The the support of the professionalism of teachers is so powerful. A sense of shared responsibility for successful learners. I mean, I think if we build on this very solid,
we can build that out.
We'll get the system we need.
Well, at least I think we get the people oriented in a way that makes that most successful. That's more likely to be successful, right? And that is really important. I agree. So we'll do that together. Yeah, absolutely. I want to quickly share with you on the right here. We don't have time to go through this, but again, this box is sort of to say, well, if I want to find out whether some of these things have been accomplished, like, what might I do? And some of these examples that you had written were often, there was a lot of surveys being mentioned. So surveys to business leaders, surveys to students, surveys to teachers, parent and student conferences. And then there's also some empirical work that some of you had recommended for certain pieces, right? So the fact that they're all sitting in this big fat box next to all of the goals is a simplification. It's really different things for different outcomes. That's a program evaluation question. But I think as a sort of sensitization exercise, it's sort of nice to sort of say, like, so when people talk about methodologies, it's these kinds of things. And in terms of quality considerations, for example, some of you mentioned, like, look, if we do a survey, we need a large sample. I added the language of large and representative for most surveys, right? We also want to make sure that questions on surveys are co-designed with members of the community, that there's buy-in essentially for the work. It needs to be, at some point, probably evaluated for like meaningful and relevant technical properties. That doesn't mean reliability necessarily, but you're not doing, but just to make sure that, questions are comprehensible, information gets aggregated and disaggregated in ways that are meaningful and defensible and things like that. So there's some stuff that we could think about there. And again, this is not, well, I want to stop here with this exercise. So this is not about this now being everything that we need to think about. I really wanted to do this with you to sort of pull your thinking together in a different way rather than the table, and sort of have this as a starting point for having these conversations that you're pushing on, right? Which is essentially like, okay, we need to, on the one hand, we need to reconcile, simplify, integrate, right? Also focus on the ANA system. And then let's say we do that in some way, then we also need to sort of translate that into a version that you can use for public communication and dissemination to signal certain things. And I think that's another conversation that we should have. Like, in other words, what representations are most helpful to you for communication, which may be actually the answer. Maybe this isn't this at all. This is just helps us to get some awareness and some understanding. So I hope for all of you, there was a little bit in this where you went like, oh, there's maybe something I hadn't thought about, or the relationships between a few pieces. It's the goal for me would always be to get whatever teams I'm working with and myself to become systems thinker, right? And really sort of making sure that all the different connections and aspects are at least considered, and there's a place for that. I always say to people I work with, it's so nice to have a little essentially dumping ground for your ideas when you have like, oh, we need to like lead it this earlier, right? We need to think about this. And then, oh yeah, I can put it here. Boom, there it is. And now it's parked there and it has a place. And that's easier than if everything is essentially in this complex cognitive washing machine. So quickly, I want to ask you whether you're okay with the following plan. My plan is, again, to do an iteration on this, give you some way of giving another round of like feedback after you slept on this, and maybe play with some ideas, play with some language. I'm thinking here, 15 minutes to half an hour. If you have it, that'd be great. And then I also want to specifically extract the value statements, the one that you like, Lou, that on the left, and sort of play with, maybe integrate a few of them, give you a chance to add to those. And prioritization, I think, is good. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that yet. There's the rating, there's the order them from 1 to 5. We'll let me think about that. And if you have any idea, let me know. And then the third thing I want to know from you, and I think I want to use a survey for this, given that we only have 2 minutes today, is I want you to think about sort of your learning agenda, right? So this was a meeting series where we sort of engaged in this sort of mixture of learning a little bit about what's going on in the work processes and the Cool Council, especially the ISC committee, and then learning a little bit what's going on in the field, and then trying to make also at the same time some progress toward or dip our toes in the water when it comes to like theory of action and value statements and design principles, so like that kind of direction. So I want you to think a little bit about like, what would you need in order to make an informed decision or informed judgment or take an informed action that helps you support the cool. I think you want to support the Cool Council. I think you want to support your colleagues. You want to send the right political messages to the public to support the process. So think about that a little bit, because it's impossible to do that obviously in 3 weeks, 1 hour each. And so it's a process, right? Johnny always says coherence is a process. I love that. And so I'll ask you that in a survey as well. And I hope that finally, we're going to be working together a little bit across the committees, I think. I already heard that from Meredith and Sarah and Audrey, and I've been able to attend some sessions, but I don't want you to lose me as a resource just because my mandated 3 hours are up. If there's things that I can contribute to this work that you find valuable, or you want to ask me a question, I'm always here. I've been teaching for a long time. I love this kind of stuff, and and we can play with different kinds of ideas and representation of whatever it is that is valuable to you. But we are out of time. An hour goes by so fast. So I want to thank you all for spending the 3 1-hour time slots with me. It was my pleasure. I wish, we had more time to talk to you all, but I hope we can do more of that in the future. And I hope, this entire process got you inspired a little bit and got you interested in thinking some more and gave you at least some guardrails and scaffolding. Okay.
Thank you.